He still remembered the cold wind pressing against them as they stood with their heads bowed before the cross. He felt the weight of his mother's tears falling onto his shoulders as she sobbed in his embrace, helpless and overwhelmed by grief.
His father's body was never found, yet there was no doubt about his fate.
He could never forget that day, even though many years had passed. The memory still lingered in his mind, like a wave relentlessly crashing against the rocks, especially now as he crouched on the rocks by the shore, gazing into the endless blue stretching out before him. Even as a child, he had always wondered what lay on the other side, far beyond the horizon. One day, he asked his father this question. His father simply smiled and said,
"Son, on the other side awaits whatever you are willing to make this journey for. This vast blue is not a barrier, but only a step on the journey, an obstacle you must overcome to prove you are ready."
His father had always been an adventurer at heart. Together with his crew, he explored regions of the world untouched by human hands, constantly driven by the need to set new goals. In the end, however, one such ambition cost him his life. He was convinced he had discovered a solution for their poverty, an energy source capable of transforming their poor coastal town into a global power city. Naturally, he was dismissed as a madman. No one believed that something powerful enough to influence an entire city could truly exist. This included his wife. She had never supported his maritime ventures and openly opposed his theories about the mysterious source. As a result, their lives became marked by frequent and bitter arguments. But from the day he vanished at sea, she was never the same. Once lively and full of strength, she slowly faded into a shadow of her former self. Oftentimes he would find her in the kitchen, broken and in tears, lost in the heavy silence his father had left behind. For that reason, telling her about his own departure was extremely difficult. After long deliberation, he decided to complete his father's work and search for the mysterious source. In doing so, he hoped not only to save the city, but also to prove that his father was not a madman, as so many believed, but a misunderstood man with a clear vision. Of course, his mother did not take it lightly. Countless arguments followed, each more bitter than the last, until one day he finally committed himself to the path he had chosen. He gathered enough money to purchase a small ship and hired an 8-man crew. They loaded their supplies, raised the anchor, and quietly sailed toward the unknown. After many long and exhausting days at sea, they were finally nearing the location marked on his father's maps. And that's when the strange events began. When he checked the course, the compass needle spun wildly, as if refusing to acknowledge any true direction. Then he tried to gauge the wind. He could have sworn gusts were coming from at least 2 different directions at once, as if some unseen force were pushing against the ship, making every forward step a struggle. By this point, doubt was starting to creep in. Some of the crew even suggested turning back, but he was far from ready to give up, especially not now, when he was so close. One evening, the ship was suddenly caught in a terrifying storm. The crew was completely shocked, as just a few hours earlier, there hadn't been a single cloud in the sky. Nothing had hinted that such a violent storm would appear, yet now it raged fearlessly, tearing the ship's sails to shreds like pieces of old cloth. They tried to turn the vessel and escape the merciless grip of the tempest, but it was too late. The wild winds had already dragged them into the heart of the storm, leaving them completely at the mercy of their own luck. The storm raged on, tossing the ship like a tiny paper boat on raging waves. Soon, massive holes opened in the hull, and icy ocean water began pouring in. The crew quickly realized they could not stay on the ship. They scrambled into the small lifeboats, their last hope. Each man took his place in a boat and launched into the wild sea.
Daniel bent deep into the boat, covering his head with his hands, as the boat was violently tossed back and forth by the sea waves. And then, suddenly, darkness.
He slowly opened his eyes. It took a few moments before he realized he was lying on the hard, damp planks of a small wooden boat. The cold had seeped into his bones, and his body curled in on itself involuntarily. With effort, he pushed himself into a sitting position and looked around. There was now no sign of the storm, not a single cloud in the sky. In every direction he turned, there was only an endless expanse of blue. He anxiously scanned the surroundings, hoping to spot any of his crew, but all in vain. For a while, he sat motionless, curled up in the boat, until in the distance he saw something unusual. On the horizon, a massive silhouette began to take shape, unclear and blurred, like the shadow of something that didn't belong to this world. At first, it seemed like a cloud, but its edges were too straight, too uniform to be natural. He noticed that the sea was unnervingly calm and completely still, despite being in the middle of the open ocean. The wind had vanished and the air hung heavy and motionless, as if the world itself was holding its breath. There were no signs of life anywhere, no birds in the sky, no shadows in the water, not a single sound. Slowly, the colossal misty form drew closer. It didn't drift, didn't spread, didn't thicken or thin. It was as if the laws of nature held no sway over it. It simply stood there, unmoving, like a titanic wall rising from the void. Even though there were no waves, no wind, some invisible force relentlessly pulled him toward that mysterious wall. Soon, he found himself at its base. He looked up, and his eyes met a colossal misty barrier, rising high above him, stretching endlessly into the sky. At that moment, he knew there was no turning back. Instinctively, he drew in a deep breath, hunched low, and braced himself for contact. The instant he touched the wall, a strange wave of unease and confusion washed over him, as if he were passing through a portal into another dimension. He found himself swallowed by an impenetrable fog, thick and damp, wrapping around him like a heavy, wet blanket. For a while, he drifted silently through it, the world reduced to gray and silence, until something stirred in the distance.
It wasn't long before a shape emerged from the fog ahead of him. A huge rusting hull lay on its side, half submerged in the calm, black water. The mast jutted out of the water like skeletons, and torn ropes dangled in the still air. Beside the half-submerged ship floated a wooden platform, upon which a shadowy figure stood. As he drew closer, the figure began to take shape. When he finally saw it clearly, his breath caught entirely. His heart seemed to stop for a moment. He could not believe his eyes. On the wooden platform, barely visible through the thick fog, stood his father. He looked exactly as he remembered him. Worn coat, dark complexion, curled up mustache, and the old sailor's cap. There was no doubt. It was him. But how? No, that was impossible. His trance was suddenly broken by a deep male voice, one he had thought long forgotten, lost in the song of the ocean.
"Son, is that really you?"
"Father?" He could barely get the words out. He stopped his boat right next to the wooden platform and quickly stepped onto it. For a few moments that felt like an eternity, they just stared at each other. Then they collapsed into an embrace. Now he felt him. He knew this was not just an illusion, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He took a step back and looked into his father's eyes. They were full of tears, but something was still missing. missing a certain spark that usually cut straight out of them. Father, how did you survive? He asked in a trembling voice.
The sea watched over me, son. I've been waiting for you.
But you only sing for use, and how?
That doesn't matter at all, son. What matters is that we're together again, and soon we'll return to your mother. Do you hear it?
From the fog in the distance, he heard the sounds of a ship.
They've come for us. We're saved. All you have to do now is come with me.
With those words, he reached out his hand toward Damien. Damien froze. He looked at his father, but something felt wrong. His heart began to beat faster, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. After several endlessly long moments passed, he made the decision. No, I can't go with you. I know there was no rescue ship that day. I know you didn't survive, Father. I've prayed for this moment for years, and now some higher force is offering me another chance, but... He took a deep breath and a tear rolled down his cheek. What happened, happened. You can't row the seas backward. You can't sail the ship again. And you can't bring a father back from the dead. I have to accept it. Let fate take its course and move forward. You taught me that yourself, Father. With those words, he wiped the tears from his face, turned and stepped back into the boat.
Wait! Don't leave, son. Can't you hear the ship? We're saved. Come back.
Damien ignored his father's cries and began rowing calmly away from the platform. Suddenly, his father's cries became loud and distorted. Soon they began to violently echo in his mind, so much so that he felt his ears would start to bleed. He turned and saw his father's face, now a grotesque mass of melting flesh and writhing tentacles flailing around wildly. The sounds reverberated like the wailing of a mad siren. The world before Damien's eyes began to tremble, not like an earthquake, but more as if someone were shaking the canvas on which reality was painted. Damien was shaken through his entire body. Nausea rose in his stomach. This is it, he thought to himself. He closed his eyes and waited for the inevitable. Then the sound stopped. The nausea began to fade. The trembling subsided. He opened his eyes. The fog was there again, but this time he immediately made something out in it. Just a few meters in front of him, he noticed a pair of legs floating in the air. As he approached, his breath caught. Bodies. He saw that it was an entire column of people slowly levitating through the fog in a strange trance. Their eyes glowed ominously, like cursed diamonds. From the grayness, a gigantic shape slipped forth. A dark tentacle without beginning or end, vanishing into the mist as if it came from a place where space itself has no limits. Too large to be real. It coiled around the floating bodies and dragged them deep into the fog. It did so with such force that it created a small shock wave, rocking his boat so violently he barely managed to stay inside. The oars flew far away and disappeared into the mist. Now he was completely at the mercy of an invisible force, and it was pulling him straight toward the direction from which the massive tentacle had come. All he could do now was crouch low in the boat and pray. He waited for the inevitable, for the moment when the full form of the gigantic monster would emerge from the fog and swallow him whole. But that moment never came. It felt as though he had been drifting for days, months, years. Time began to lose all meaning. He no longer knew whether he had been in the boat for hours or for centuries. Past, present, and future seemed to exist all at once. The space around him had completely lost all logic. Things that belonged beneath the surface now floated in the sky, while what should have soared above lay submerged below. A sudden realization struck him. The world was fracturing, reality itself collapsing before his eyes. Then, the fog ripped apart in a violent surge. What he saw before him didn't just take his breath away, it completely shattered his perception of reality. He felt as though he were staring straight into the end of the world. He found himself at the edge of a colossal chasm. At its center yawned a gigantic hole. The edges were indistinct, as if reality itself ended there. Light poured into it, never to return. It resembled some kind of portal, or a black hole perhaps. Several hundred meters above it hovered a massive glowing sphere of energy, enormous. Light radiated from it in slow, heavy throbs, like the heartbeat of something that should not even exist. Around it, human bodies floated in a circle, like satellites trapped in eternal orbit. From each of them shot a thin, continuous beam of energy that flowed into the sphere. He floated there alone, small and insignificant, like a single grain of wheat in an endless, unmoving field. Then something caught his attention. From the fog on the far side of the vast opening, several gigantic dark tentacles began to emerge. Pale outlines followed behind them. From the cloud of mist high in the sky, 3 colossal, horribly distorted beings appeared, breaking every law of reality. They were so enormous that his gaze could not take them in all at once. Their long tentacles reminded him of an octopus, yet the rest of their bodies looked far more alien. They were more dreadful than anything he could have imagined. With their immense tentacles, they surged through the sky, driving straight toward the sphere. His gaze drifted toward the floating bodies circling the sphere. Among them, he immediately noticed a figure so familiar that his chest tightened. His father. He drifted among the others, motionless, a thin beam of light flowing from his chest toward the sphere. His eyes were open but empty. Beside him, he spotted 2 of his fellow sailors. All of them were floating here now, trapped in an endless orbit around the sphere. He wanted to cry, but at this point he felt nothing. No fear, no sorrow, no despair, nothing. In truth, he no longer felt alive at all. It felt as though he were drifting somewhere in the middle of the cosmos, between all realities, watching the worlds around him from a distant remove. Suddenly, he understood the beings and their role here. They were something ancient and alien, older than the universe itself. They were not here to destroy, but to guard. They were gathering energy for the sphere. The sphere was not a weapon, but a barter. The accumulated energy of all who had ever succumbed to the fog and remained trapped in the forever. And that energy was holding the wormhole beneath it in place, preventing it from spreading and swallowing their world. If enough energy were gathered, the wormhole would finally close, and the people would become the very fabric of space and time, their minds locked eternally, trapped forever inside a single unending memory. He did not know where all this knowledge came from, yet it felt as if the sphere itself was placing it into his mind, quietly, inevitably, like a truth that had always been anchored somewhere deep inside him. At the sight of his father, it finally became clear. He had found what he had been searching for. Before him, in all its terrifying glory, burned a colossal source of energy. His father had overcome the obstacles. He had crossed the blue. He had reached the other side. But what awaited him there was not what he had expected. Could it be that there had always been a flaw in his teachings? That sometimes the journey across the sea demands more than it ever gives in return? His father had fought. He had fought too hard. His relentless, stubborn, blind pursuit of success had ultimately led him here. He had failed to see that the source he had been chasing all this time was, in truth, his undoing. And now he was a part of it. Damien stared at him. For the first time, he understood what he had to do: to let go and move on. At that moment, all 3 beings turned toward him at once. The sphere flared, as if it could explode at any second, and then a bright flash of light, and the world before his eyes vanished. As he opened his eyes, the sun's rays stabbed into his vision. For a few seconds, he couldn't make sense of anything, until he realized he was lying on solid ground, his face turned up toward the light. He pushed himself into a sitting position and brushed his face. Sand. Could it be? He looked around. The fog was gone. He was no longer in the middle of the sea. Instead, he lay safely on a sandy shore. And not just any shore. He was on the beach beside a small town. At once he recognized the harbor, the buildings lining the coast. He was home. He dropped to his knees and began to cry with joy. When he looked out toward the sea, his boat was nowhere to be seen. Had it all just been a dream? He didn't intend to dwell on it. As quickly as he could, he sprinted off the beach and up the slope toward his house. But as he ran through the streets, he began to notice something was different. The shops and houses were familiar, yet strangely altered. It looked as if the town had reshaped itself without his knowing. When he finally arrived at his house, he realized it was one of the few buildings that hadn't been restored. Its old walls were cracked, the windows grimy, and the roof half collapsed. He stepped inside and called out loudly for his mother, but there was no answer. As he stepped into the bedroom, everything suddenly became clear. There, lying helplessly on the bed, was an old woman. He recognized her instantly, but she did not recognize him. Her eyes, worn down by time and illness, slowly opened. Even as he stepped closer to the bed, there was no sign of recognition.
Who are you?
She managed to whisper in a frail voice.
It's me, Mom, your son. I'm home.
In an instant, she snapped out of her trance, recognition washing over her. Damien? She murmured, almost inaudibly. Is it really you? A tear slid down her cheek.
Yes, Mom, it's me. What happened here? Why is everything different?
Slowly, she raised her hand and reached toward him. Her fingers trembled as they touched his cheek. For a brief moment, warmth flickered back into her eyes.
Oh, my dear Damien, you did it.
She gestured toward the wall, but then her hand fell away. The warmth vanished, replaced by confusion. Her brows knit together as if she were staring at a stranger.
No, that's not possible.
She whispered, pulling her hand back.
My Damien disappeared 50 years ago.
Her body gave way as her strength left her. Her head slumped to the side, and before she could say anything more, she lost consciousness. He took a step back. Tears began to gather in the corners of his eyes. Then he remembered his mother's words. What had she meant by, "You did it"? He looked toward the wall she had pointed to earlier and noticed a framed newspaper page, published 50 years ago, shortly after he himself had set out to find his father. The headline read, "During a rescue mission aboard Captain Mers's ship, an energy source was discovered that transformed the fate of the town." Suddenly, everything became clear. If he hadn't gone in search of his father, the rescue mission would never have taken place, and the discovery would never have happened. He had successfully restored his father's reputation. Now everyone believed he was a genius. He had achieved his goal, but at what cost? He stared at the picture of his father in the newspaper, framed on the wall, with tears in his eyes. And it was then that he realized, if you want to achieve your goals, you must let go of the past and move on. That is the only way to escape the fog. But sometimes, what you are searching for is exactly what you've had beside you all along. You just don't realize it. For in the end, the goals you pursue and the devotion you give them may become the very fog that swallows you whole.